Hi, everyone. Good morning. How are you? Did everyone have a nice free night? All right, good. Glad. You wouldn't admit it if you didn't. All right, my friends. We have a difficult task ahead this morning because the question that I'm trying to put on the table is how do you answer a fool? And I'm starting with the supposition that there are people who we think are fools. We may be related to them. We may work with them. We may see them on the subway. We may see them only on social media. And the trouble is, I don't want to be simplistic about this. And I don't want to just tell you things you already know. What I want to do is I want to try to delve into the issue honestly and try to ask what are the variables that we should be thinking about in how we answer a fool. In order to define what a fool is, I'd like to share with you something from social media where we spend our time deciding who is a fool, sometimes acting like fools, and calling each other fools. This is from my Facebook wall from February 2017. I wrote a Facebook post about the final evacuation of the Amona outpost, the Amona settlement, in February 2017, and I talked about how, on the one hand, it's very depressing to see people have to leave their homes and not know where they're going, especially when the government told them that they could be there in the first place, and how, on the other hand, this may be what a Jewish and democratic state has to look like. And what I got back was mostly, thanks, Elana, that's great, thank you so much, and then I got one, give me a break. And then I wrote, I think we've been through this conversation before. Unproductive. And I wouldn't and don't do it to you. I actually don't recall going through this with you, but okay. I know the echo chamber is going to echo, so it's mostly a waste of time to register how false your crocodile tears ring. Order issued by the least democratic institution possible, but I get it. Democracy is whatever the left says it means. We've gone through this conversation that the dismissive rhetoric doesn't work to teach anyone anything. Regarding your points, I'm happy for you to disagree. I'm expressing my thoughts precisely because the tears are real, and I think that others may feel supported if they have similar approaches. Frankly, it's hard for me to fathom the deep ideological incoherence it takes to sincerely express that position. My failure to do that leads me to maybe an unfounded assumption of insincerity. So my bad, I guess. This goes on. What's a fool? Well, in that exchange, he thought I was a fool. And I thought he was a fool. When we talk about issues where there are big things at stake, there's identity at stake, there's boundaries at stake, there's actual impact on real people at stake, I think we have two kinds of fools. One kind of fool is someone who I think takes a foolish position. I think their position is foolish, misguided, wrong, maybe even dangerous. Another kind of fool is a person who I think takes a position in a foolish way. Using rhetoric, being a little bit hard-headed, impossible to talk to, not thinking that there's a thinking being on the other side. So I want to talk about how we respond to both of these fools, because here we were, two fools on Facebook, talking to each other, until a third person came in and was a little less foolish. And I want to suggest that there are three really important variables to consider in this conversation of how we answer a fool. And you're going to be surprised that I'm not going to start with the partial nature of all knowledge, the humility to know that I don't know everything. You know, that's true, but then there are also some things that you know. There are some things that you feel in your gut that make you you. The positions that you take, not because you're some omniscient being, but because you know that this is the right position and the person who takes the other one is a fool. Or you know you're behaving properly and you know that they're not behaving properly. So I'm not going to start with that. The variables that I want to think about are three. The first is the nature of the issue. And when I say the nature of the issue, what I mean is everything from that word salient again, everything from how prominent, how important, how much of a linchpin that issue is for you, to what kind of threat does this debate pose to you or to someone else. Those can be related, but they don't have to be exactly the same thing. Is that the variable in deciding how I answer the fool? So if more is at stake, I answer in a certain way, and if less is at stake, I answer in a different way. Second, character. Both my character of who I want to be and the fool's character, which is what do I consider that fool capable of in terms of this conversation. And the third is relationship. Do we have a pre-existing relationship? Do we want a relationship? Do we need a relationship? How do these variables impact the way that we think about how we speak to a fool? Yes. Wes. Yeah.
It feels to me like, I want to ask you about the word fool. That feels like an ad hominem insult. And I think so much of the toxicity of our conversation is ad hominem insults. And in the case that you started with, you and this other person have very different views about the settlements and about uprooting them, etc. But to call somebody a fool because you don't agree with their views, when they are deeply convicted in their own views, I feel like your title is part of the problem, not part of the solution.
Great. So Rabbi Garden-Schwartz says, my title is part of the problem. Done to provoke. Because what we're going to do is we're going to look together at how the term ksil, how the term fool, as used in Proverbs and by the rabbis, is meant to be responded to. I'm using it purposely because what we're going to see is that sometimes a fool is not a fool, and sometimes an adversary may be a fool. Let's see where it goes. So I appreciate that question, and I've also learned from last year when Rabbi Garden-Schwartz raises his hand at the beginning of the session, you call on him then. You don't wait to the end, because what happens is at the end he asks a question that uproots everything you said, and then you have to start again. So you see, no fool here. I learned it. I learned it. So I want you to come on a journey with me. The journey with me is that we're going to see first how Proverbs uses fool and how you answer a fool, the book of Proverbs, Tanakh, Bible, and then how the rabbis try to neatly fit different situations into different boxes, and then, of course, how the rabbis decide to problematize that, okay? All to give us a sense of how these variables work together. Before I start, I haven't started yet. Before I start, I need to say two more things. Number one, I need to thank my chavrutot. I had two chavrutot in preparing this class. One is my longtime chavruta, Rose Landdown, who I've been chavruta with for many years. And the other is Dr. Christine Hayes, who is my teacher. And we'll be giving a version of this, actually, at the Rabbinic Torah Seminar next week, so I have to thank the two of them. The second is I have to tell you that it's a dangerous business trying to look to the rabbis to ask how you do dialogue well. I'll tell you why. The Babylonian Talmud is full of verbal violence from rabbi to rabbi and full of public shaming from rabbi to rabbi. Jeffrey Rubenstein has 2 chapters in a book, The Culture of the Babylonian Talmud, where he says this was not the case in the Palestinian Talmud, in the Jerusalem Talmud. It is the case in the Babylonian Talmud. And he tries to figure out why it is and what's going on. Is it that they were face-to-face and combative? Is this the war of Torah? These were the rules of the game? So what I'm actually trying to do is I don't want to bracket that. I want to keep that in mind as we learn what they have to say consciously about how you speak to a fool, okay? So let's take a look at number 1. Where I start is that there is a deep ambivalence in getting into a conversation with someone who you deeply disagree with. There is deep ambivalence about getting into a conversation with people who are stubborn and don't want to listen. There is deep ambivalence. Do I get into this conversation? Do I not? What is going to happen here? Is this productive? Is this a waste of my time? And that ambivalence is actually reflected and expressed in the book of Proverbs. Number 1, the book of Proverbs, Mishlei, chapter 26, verse 4. Answer not a fool according to their folly, lest you also be like them. Al ta'an ksil, there's that word, fool, ksil. Ki ivalto, pen tishvelo gam ata. And in the very next verse, the opposite. Answer a fool according to their folly, lest they be wise in their own eyes. Anek ksil ki ivalto, pen yeh chacham be'inav. So you tell me, which is it? Do I answer the fool or do I not? And I have to say that if you look in the book of Proverbs, the fool, the ksil, is defined as someone who doesn't want to learn and is also defined as someone who takes bad positions. Objectively bad positions, whatever that means. And the book of Mishlei has ideas as to what objectively bad positions are. So clearly there's ambivalence here. But I think there's more than that. Can I ask you a question? How do you know if you're the fool or if you're the wise person? Don't answer the fool lest you become like the fool. And you should answer the fool lest the fool think that they are wise in their own eyes. Well, aren't I, in starting the conversation, wise in my own eyes? How do I exactly know who the fool is? And I think some of that is actually being brought to the surface through this ambivalence as well, which is the idea that there would be a static, I know, they don't, is actually hard to imagine once you start getting into the argument. And so I want to pay homage to that. And as I read these verses, as I read these psukim, I wonder, what does ke'ivalto mean? Like his folly, like his foolishness. Does it mean don't engage because to begin with that other person is engaged in folly, so don't engage in the conversation? Or does it mean don't engage in a certain way, right? Don't engage in a bad way, in a foolish way. Which one does it mean? I don't know. The word ivelet, actually, the term itself, and story that's either funny or not funny, but definitely self-reflective. When I was a kid, my middle name is Yael. Does anybody know how to spell Yael? Yud, Ayin, Lamed. I had a doll that said Yael, Yud, Aleph, Lamed, that my grandmother got for me. I found out in preparing for this shiur what Yael means. It's not good. Yael is related to the word ivelet. Yael is either sin, asher no'alnu v'asher chatanu, that we say in the high holidays, that we have sinned before you, God, or it's azut panim, brazenness. Hinena ho'alti ledaber. Avram says to God, I have become brazen enough to speak before you. So again, we have these two things. Don't answer them according to their sin, or don't answer them according to their brazenness. So are we saying don't engage them in the conversation and I will not dignify that with a response. I will not dignify that. Or are we saying actually answering like that is foolish because the fool is somebody who doesn't want to learn? I'm not sure. I'm actually not sure. And I want to see what the rabbis do with it because they are sure, or at least they seem sure at the beginning. We're in number 3. The Babylonian Talmud in Shabbat, on this particular folio, is talking about why the rabbis or somebody didn't want the book of Proverbs in the Jewish canon. And the reason they didn't want the book of Proverbs in the Jewish canon is because it has lots of contradictions. What's the contradiction they come up with? Ours, that we just saw. Has a basic contradiction at its heart. Of course, they're going to resolve the contradiction because that's what the rabbis do. And in resolving the contradiction, they're going to try to give us rules of thumb for how to act. Is it okay if I read in Hebrew Aramaic and translate it? That's all right? All right, let's do that. Va'af, number 3. Va'af sefer mishlei bikshu lignoz. They wanted to put away, to store away the book of Proverbs. Shahayu dvarav sotrim ze et ze, because its words contradict each other. Umipnei malo ganzuhu, and why didn't they put it away? Amri, they said, Sefer Kohelet, the book of Ecclesiastes, which contains many, I should say, more high-stakes kinds of contradictions, like is there meaning to life? Where do we go after we die? The book of Ecclesiastes, Lav Eininan v'ashkechinan Tama, didn't we look into it and figure out how to resolve these contradictions? Hachanami la'eininan. Maybe we can also look into it here and fix it. Umay dvarav sotrim ze et ze. What's the contradiction? K'tiv, it says, al ta'an ksil ki ivalto, do not answer, quote, a fool, in their folly, or like their folly, in the manner of. Uktiv, and then it says, ane ksil ki ivalto, answer the fool like their folly. Lo kasha, no question. Ha b'divrei Torah, ha b'milei da'alma. In the case of Torah, you follow one of these verses, and in the case of other things, you follow another. Which is which? I don't know. But I will say, before we get to where the rabbis go with it, what they're starting with is that it's issue-based. If it's this kind of issue, answer. If it's that kind of issue, don't. Now, granted, they haven't told us yet, what does it mean to answer ki ivalto? What does it mean to answer in their manner of folly? Does it mean to justify their claim to have a conversation, or does it mean to speak rhetorically and squelch them, which are opposite explanations? So let's see where we go. So we're going to give some examples. The first example, kiha, like the following case, which is going to be mile de-alma, just life, not about Torah, just life. Like the guy who came before Rabbi Judah the Prince, pretty important fellow. Amar le, he says, Ishtecha ishti uvanecha banai. Your wife is my wife and your children are my children. Can you tell me in English what he's saying? He's saying your wife had an affair. He's saying your children are bastards. Your children are illegitimate. That's what he's saying. That's what this, did they have a relation? I don't know. Amarle, so Rebbe says to him, do you want to have a drink with me? Well, he's not. Guess what? Shata, he drank. Upaka, he exploded. Now, we had this conversation about the sota yesterday, the suspected adulteress. This is clearly a play on that, right? He's going to drink the wine, and he's going to explode the way that a suspected adulteress would explode, because what he did is he suspected, or he accused someone of adultery. Hahu de'ata lakami de Rabbi Chia, the person who came before Rabbi Chia and said, Amar le said, this is even worse. This is the first your mama joke in history. It's terrible. Amar le imcha ishti, your mother is my wife. Ve'ata beni, and you are my son, meaning you are illegitimate. Amar le, he says to him, want to have a drink? Shata, he drank. Upaka, he exploded. So I read this and I say to myself, is this answering the fool or not answering the fool? Meaning, you answer the fool by killing it? What? Amar Rabbi Chia says, probably explaining his own behavior. Ahanya leit slute leRebbe. Rebbe's prayer that he would say every day helped him. Delo lishavye bane mamzere. Not to allow his children to become illegitimate. Why? De Rebbe ki havamatzle, because Rebbe, when he would pray, Amar, he would say, Yehi ratzon milfanecha Hashem Elokeinu, God, it should be your will, shetatzileni hayom me'azei panim u'me'azut panim, that you should save me today from brazen people and brazenness. Is this answering or not answering? I think it's not answering. I think what happens here is that there's some sort of, I'm not going to justify your crazy accusation that my children are illegitimate. I'm not even going to justify it. But what am I going to do? So one read of this is I'm going to do violence to you. Which, by the way, that may bother you, but I invite you to read race activist Devante Torriente on page 4 for a second. I invite you to read that for a second with me in 4. called I Don't Owe You My Tolerance, How Civil Discourse Functions to Uphold Systems of Oppression. And you'll hear more about this from Michal. It's time for us to do away with the idea that we must be respectful or courteous to be entitled to our rights. Politeness is not a requirement when we are confronting anyone who uses their political and social power to further disenfranchise us. We are now charged with ushering in a new era of normalized discomfort, in which people in positions of power know that in this fight for our humanity, we will not concede the raw power of our indignation. In this age of entitlement by those with problematic or seemingly unpopular views, remember this: I don't owe you my tolerance, especially not when my life is at stake. So on the one hand, it seems that this passage in the Talmud is telling us answer with violence. Don't answer, give the rod. On the other hand, Rabbi and Rabbi Chia don't do violence. They invite the guy with for a drink, and they basically pray to God that he goes away. So what's that? Meaning, what does it mean for the rabbis to tell us, don't answer a fool, when it means that you have to rely on a miracle for that to work? Is there something already that we're meant to understand that the idea of not answering actually doesn't solve anything without a miracle? The second approach of answering. We're on, I don't know if you're on the next page, but I'm on the next page. Let me see. Nope, we're on the same page, page 3, middle of the page. B'divrei Torah. What about if the argument is about Torah and not about the status, the personal status of yourself or your children? B'divrei Torah, let's read it in English, I'll give you a break. In matters of Torah, what is the case regarding which the verse says that one should respond to a fool's folly? As in the case where Rabban Gamliel was sitting and he interpreted a verse, I'm going to leave out the word homiletically. In the future, women will give birth every day. That sounds like a nightmare. As it says, the woman with child and she that gives birth together, meaning she will be both with child, pregnant, and giving birth. Again, that sounds like a nightmare. But Rabban Gamliel is describing this as the Messianic age. And by the way, it's Jeremiah 31:8, not 31:7. A certain student scoffed at him and said, but there is nothing new under the sun. What are you talking about? Rabban Gamliel said to him, come and I will show you an example of this in this world. He took him outside and showed him a chicken that lays eggs every day. It has an egg inside and it lays an egg at the same time. Did I say sounds like a nightmare enough? And furthermore, Rabban Gamliel sat and interpreted a verse. In the future, trees will produce fruits every day. He's talking about the Messianic era. As it is stated, and it shall bring forth branches and bear fruit. Just as a branch grows every day, so too fruit will be produced every day. A certain student, likely the same one, scoffed at him and said, isn't it written there's nothing new under the sun? He said to him, come and I will show you an example of this in this world. He went outside and showed him a caper bush, part of which is edible during each season of the year. And furthermore, Rabban Gamliel sat and interpreted a verse. In the future, the land of Israel will produce cakes and fine wool garments that will grow straight out of the ground. As it is stated, let abundant grain be in this land. A certain student scoffed at him and said, there's nothing new under the sun. He said to him, come and I will show you an example in this world. He went outside and showed him truffles and mushrooms, which emerge from the earth over the course of a single night and are shaped like a loaf of bread. And regarding wool garments, he showed him the covering of a heart of palm, a young palm branch, which is wrapped in a thin net-like covering. This is the example of answer the fool according to his foolishness. What's happening here? Well, I have at least 3 reads. 1, Rabban Gamliel was serious. Rabban Gamliel was serious that this is what the Messianic era looks like, and this student, lig, scoffed. That's the problem, the rhetoric. The student scoffed, and his answer was, you know what? Let's talk about it. I'm going to get you there. I'm going to get you there. It's not let's have a drink or get out of here, right? I'm going to get you there. Another possibility is that Rabban Gamliel was being metaphorical, and this student is so foolish he didn't understand. And was like, that's ridiculous. And instead of saying, you're a fool. I'm talking about this. He said, okay, if you only understand the material way of looking at this, I'll help you. Let me help you. So the content, he's a fool in his content. A third possibility is Rabbi Gamliel is joking, and this guy doesn't understand. I think that's remote because of the words kadarish or kadarash. He was actually giving a homily. What's the difference between these two? Why in one case do you give them a drink and pray for a miracle, and in the other case, you engage? So the Gemara started by telling us, well, it's about the issue. What's the issue? If the issue is your children, and it's that salient, and it matters to that degree, just get that person out of here. If the issue is Torah, where you're going to argue and you're going to discuss, and it's a discourse, then you can engage. But I actually think that as the Gemara goes on, that's not the variable that's most important. It seems that the variable that's most important is the identity of the ksil, of the fool. What type of interlocutor are we talking about? Are we talking about a person who comes up to you and says, your children are illegitimate, and they are actually wicked? They are actually trying to cause harm. They are here to cause harm. They are a rasha. And in that case, my answer is, here, have a drink. And whatever happens, happens. And in the second case, it's a person who doesn't get it. Maybe they scoffed, but they're just ignorant. They didn't understand. They don't understand what you're saying. So we code that as saying these are issues in the world and these are issues in Torah. There's also another difference. What's the relationship between Rebbe and this guy who walks up to me and says your children are illegitimate? Do they even know each other? I don't know. What's the relationship between Rabbi Gamliel and his student? It's a teacher-student relationship. What that means is there's a power dynamic there. Someone's in charge, and the person in charge might have to be a little bit more responsible in the way that they respond. What it means is that there's actually maybe some goodwill that they have from before that they're actually working on, whereas in the first case, they don't. So I think what the rabbis present as their neat outline for us, which they're about to muck up, is that if it's a person who's coming with evil intent and wickedness, shoo them away. It may take a miracle, but shoo them away. If it's and maybe even commit violence. Maybe even commit violence. It could be verbal violence. If it's a person who is ignorant, who just doesn't understand, is underexposed, talk to them. What do you think of that so far? Anybody troubled? Troubled. Don, you troubled? Donald?
I think there's another fundamental difference.
Yes.
Which is that in the first case, even having the discussion causes harm.
Watch. Beautiful. The first case, the discussion causes harm. The stakes are too high. If I engage in this discussion, am I admitting that there could be an actual valid argument to racism? There could be an actual valid argument to separating children from their parents? I'm not engaging in this conversation. There's a valid argument that Israel doesn't have a right to exist? I'm not engaging you in this discussion. That's not even valid. And engaging in the discussion is dangerous. Well, watch this. The rabbis give us this nice, neat dichotomy. And then they muck it up on purpose. The wicked person who comes at you with the situation in which the stakes are so high that even engaging in the argument is a problem. Do you really always shoo them out the door? Anybody want to learn a funny Gemara? We're going to learn a funny Gemara. Also offensive. It's also going to be offensive. Warning you. Number 6. Ki havu miklai Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon Bahadi Hadadi. When the two of these rabbis, Rabbi Yishmael, son of Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, would walk next to each other, and it means belly to belly, it seems, or maybe side to side, but their bellies were, I told you it's a little offensive, okay? Hava'ayil bakra de Torah beinahu. A pair of oxen could walk between them. They were very heavy. Velo havanaga behu, and it wouldn't touch their bodies. Amra lehu hahi matronita. A matron, a fancy Roman noblewoman. Think about power dynamics again. Fancy Roman noblewoman says, B'nechem einam shelachem. It's not possible that your children are your children. They must be from some other men. Your wives must have committed adultery. They're illegitimate. The exact same claim. She says, you couldn't have slept with anybody. You're too big. I told you, offensive. You're too big. Are you ready for the answer? It's going to get weird. You ready? Okay, we're going to get weird. Amrullah, they said to her, Shelahen gadol mishelanu. Our wives are bigger than we are. Right? It's like funny, but also really offensive, but also funny. Okay. It's meant to be sort of like it's meant to be like, anybody see the sculptor Fernando Botero? Ever see the sculptor Fernando? He makes everything out of proportion. That it's meant to be sort of this sort of really emphatic, strange overemphasis on the aesthetic that is looked down upon by the rabbis. That, right? Meaning the Greco-Roman matron, the Roman matron who only understands aesthetics in one way, she's the enemy here. She's the ksil, she's the fool. Okay. Kol shekin, she says, how much more so? If they're as big as you are, of course you can't sleep together. Ika de Amri, some people say, there are versions of this story. That's the most amazing thing about the Gemara. There's more than one version of this story. Okay? Hachi Amrullah, this is what they said to her. Ki ish gvurato. As big as we are, that's as big as we are. That's all I'm gonna. It's a euphemism, you understand? I'm not. Okay? Meaning we're not compensating for anything, is what they're saying. So we can. Ika da Amri, another suggestion of what they answered. Amrullah, ahava docheket et habasar. Love contracts flesh, right? Which is the ultimate the aesthetic of the Greco-Romans. You don't understand what love is. Love is not physical bodies. Love is something deeper. And then the Gemara says, wait, didn't Rebbe not answer the guy who says his kids are illegitimate? Aren't the stakes too high? Don't you want to not even justify that with a conversation? Well, let's see. V'lama lehu lahadurela. Why did they answer her? V'haktiv, doesn't it say in Mishlei? Al ta'an ksil ki ivalto. Don't answer a fool in the manner of their foolishness. So why did they answer? Not because the stakes weren't high, but because the stakes were. Shelo lahotzi la'az al b'nehem. So that people wouldn't actually think that their children were illegitimate. What does it mean to say that when the stakes are high and when I'm actually scandalized by the other person's position, that actually that's exactly when I need to know how to engage with them? That's exactly when I need to provide a satisfactory answer. That's not when I say, here, take a drink and let's see what happens. Or, la 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 la, I don't hear you. That's the way a fight between me and my brother-in-law once started. I can't say on video what he said. And it didn't end well. Is it possible that when the wicked come at you with the highest of stakes, that actually that's where you need to have the conversation? Now, there's no way of knowing which Gemara preceded which here. Actually, I should say, you could actually probably suggest that the one that we read first preceded this one, because the idea of actually bringing in the question of, and doesn't it say you shouldn't answer? But not totally clear. Both exist here. But just note that one is based on a miracle, and the other one is about getting your results through your own voice. Yeah, Arlene.
Are these for talking to the fool or talking to a third party who might be listening?
The conversation that's being had for the rabbis right now is to their imagined third party. Is to their imagined third party. This didn't really happen. The story is to give you a sense of what is our ethic around this. For whoever's reading this, our ethic is complicated. Our ethic is complicated. And you know what? Sometimes you think don't engage because the stakes are high. Sometimes that's specifically when you actually have to engage. Even if it seems ridiculous, I'm sitting here talking about my reproductive organs with this random woman who I don't even know. Like, what do I owe her? Where does she come from? They don't have a relationship. Now, there's a power dynamic there that may influence. There's a status dynamic. Or alternatively, you could say she's outside the Jewish community. Who's listening to her? Who cares, right? It's a good question. Can I go on and then I'll call on you in a few? That's the first way I want to muck it up. Or the rabbis themselves. The idea that by definition, when the stakes are higher, that's when you say, let's have a drink and let's see what happens to you. Or basically, you push people off. That maybe actually when the stakes are higher, that's when you have to engage. But I have a second problematization, which is, how do you exactly know when someone is a rasha, is wicked, and has evil intentions, versus when someone's ignorant, and they have different exposures than you? And ignorant sounds like a judgmental term. Let's put differently exposed or underexposed. How do you know the difference? And the rabbis put it as though you know the difference very well. But then in the passage immediately after what we read with Rebbe and Rabbi Chia, they muck it up. Take a look with me at number 7. This is immediately after we just saw the very clear ground rules for when you don't answer, when the guy's a jerk and they're coming to do wickedness and the stakes are very high and you have no relationship. And then when you do answer, when it's about Torah and they're already engaged and they really just don't understand and they're not evil and you have a relationship, very clear, right? And in comes Hillel in number 7. The sages taught in a Breita, an early source, a person should always be patient like Hillel and not impatient like Shammai. Wait a second. Always be patient? Should Rebbe have been patient? What does that mean? You just said you're not always patient. There was an incident involving 2 people who wagered with each other and said, anyone who will go and aggravate Hillel to the point that Hillel reprimands him will get 400 zuz. You could buy a lot of goats. If you think about the Passover Seder, you could buy a lot of goats, okay? One of them said, I'm in. I'll aggravate him. That day, he chose to bother Hillel. It was Friday afternoon, and Hillel was washing his hair. I love that. He went and passed the entrance to Hillel's house and said, who here is Hillel? Who here is Hillel? He doesn't know who Hillel is. Everybody knows who Hillel is. He doesn't know not to come to his house on Friday afternoon. Of course, everybody knows. Hillel robed himself and went out to greet him. He said to him, my son, what do you seek? Notice, Hillel builds relationship rather immediately. He said to him, I have a question to ask. Hillel said to him, my son, ask. The man asked him, why are the heads of Babylonians oval? Hillel is Babylonian, by the way. I know, contrary to what people know. He said to him, my son, you have asked a significant question. The reason is because they don't have clever midwives, so their heads come out misshapen. The man waited a while, returned and said, who here is Hillel? Who here is Hillel? Hillel robed himself and went out to greet him. Hillel said to him, my son, what do you seek? The man said to him, I have a question to ask. He said to him, ask, my son, ask. The man asked, why are the eyes of the Palmyrians bleared? Like, why do they have tears in their eyes all the time? Hillel said to him, my son, you've asked a significant question. The reason is because they live among the sands, and the sand gets into their eyes. Once again, and I apologize, this is going to be offensive only because of the way we understand race today and the way that they did not. Once again, the man went, waited a while, returned and said, who here is Hillel? Who here is Hillel? Again, he robed himself and went out to greet him. He said to him, my son, what do you seek? He said to him, I have a question to ask. He said to him, ask, my son, ask. The man asked, why do Africans have broad feet? Hillel said to him, you have asked a significant question. The reason is because they live in marshlands and their feet widened. Look, evolution in the Talmud. Their feet widened to enable them to walk through those swampy areas. Are you exasperated with this guy yet? And you're not doing your hair in the shower, have to get robed every time, and the head of the rabbinic establishment. The man said to him, I have many more questions to ask, but I am afraid lest you get angry. Hillel robed himself and sat before him and said to him, all the questions that you must ask, ask them. The man said to him, are you Hillel, who they call the Nasi, the prince of Israel, which is really the leader? He said to him, yes. He said to him, if it is you, then may there not be many like you in Israel. Hillel said to him, my son, for what reason do you say this? The man said to him, because I lost 400 zuz because of you. Hillel said to him, you be careful of your moods. Hillel is worthy that you may lose 400 zuz and another 400 zuz, meaning if you make another bet like this on his account, yet Hillel will not lose his temper. 1 second. Should Rebbe have taken the guy in to have a drink and not killed him? Should he have taken the guy in and said, my son, is this a turn the other cheek? You should know that academics do talk about Hillel as the rabbinic response to Jesus. That over and over again, Hillel shows up as this pauper who goes and sacrifices himself, and he's always turning the other cheek, and that's what he does, right? It doesn't seem, do you think the guy at the end learned anything? You think the guy when he started, was he a Russia? Was he a bad guy? He was a bad guy? He had pretty bad intentions. He didn't come in to be like, I really want to understand, and I don't have an encyclopedia, so I want to ask you, right? He had nefarious intentions, not as nefarious as your children are illegitimate, but it is interesting that the rabbis follow up the conversation about the illegitimate children versus Rabbi Gamliel's student with a situation in which they have no relationship. The guy comes with nefarious intentions, and I don't think the stakes are high, but it's pretty disrespectful. So is there a turn the other cheek element, or is it actually sometimes the people who come with nefarious intentions are actually just underexposed to certain things? Not always, but sometimes they are. Take a look at the story that comes next. You can guess it. What's the story that comes next? Hillel. What? Loud. You can't be like, no, I said it. What is it? Shammai, the story with the convert. The story with the convert, we're not going to go through it. All I want to read is the last line, which nobody ever reads. The story with the convert, there are 3 converts, okay? One convert who says, what are your Torahs? And Hillel says, and Shammai say, we have a written Torah and an oral Torah, and they have to build trust with the guy, because he says, I only want the written Torah because I only trust that. Another situation is a guy wants to become the high priest. He says, I'm going to convert to become, and they have to build trust and teach him. And of course, Shammai kicks him out the whole time, and Hillel talks to him. And then the last, well, actually, it's not really the last, it's really the second, is our teach me Torah on 1 foot, or one regulum, right? One principle. The last line is actually, we're in the last line, liyamim, sometime later, nizdavgu shloshtan lemakom echad. These 3 converts were together somewhere. All 3 of them were together. Amru, they said, kapdanuto shel Shammai biksha letordenu min ha'olam. Shammai's anger and impatience tried to take us out of this world, meaning it tried to keep us from our Jewish journey. An vitanuto shel Hillel, but Hillel's patience and calm and humility, kirvanu tachat kanfei hashchina, brought us under the wings of the Almighty. This is not turn the other cheek. People are teachable. If everyone who comes at us with a give me a break, or well, actually, I disagree with you on this policy, and you look at me and say, I think your policy is nefarious. If everyone we look at, we assume is a rasha and needs to be taken out for a drink, well, then there's something wrong with our character. We're putting it all on their character. How do you know who's wicked and who's ignorant. How do you know? And I mean, the wildest, people read this story about this kid, Derech Black, who was brought up as a neo-Nazi, went to college, was outed as a neo-Nazi. Everybody turned against him, but an Orthodox Jewish kid invited him for Shabbos meals, and eventually he turned around. That's a crazy example of this, right? Where somebody appears as evil, and then over time, what you realize is they didn't have the exposures that I have. That's a wild example. And I'm not saying everyone is that, but if everyone fits into the category of nefarious, wicked, can't be taught, fool, can't be taught, then there's something wrong with my character, not their character. I want to offer us two more things to think about. We're going to have time for questions. I want to offer us two more things to think about. Because what we did here is we talked about the fact that the book of Mishlei, that the book of Proverbs, which actually obsesses over the problematics of the ksil, of the fool, mentioned so many times in the book as the person to stay away from. That there are times when you don't engage, or even when you engage in the same kind of rhetoric, and there are times when you do engage in a kind way. And then what the rabbis did with this is they said, let's find rules of thumb. Let's think about these questions of how big are the stakes? How great are the stakes? What is the issue? Do you have a relationship? What's the nature of that other person's character? And then they challenge that and say, well, wait, sometimes, specifically when the stakes are high, you have to have the conversation. Sometimes the person who you think is a rasha or a ksil can actually be taught. Not always, but sometimes. And how do you determine when that is? What role does my character have to play in this conversation? I want to offer two more issues, two more considerations to put on the table. The considerations are not in the context of where the rabbis are talking about how you talk to the ksil, the fool. I showed you the only two places in the Babylonian Talmud that comes up. Literally the only two places, and they contradict each other, which I absolutely love. There are other considerations. The impact of al ta'an ksil, the impact of being unwilling to engage and pushing away. Has anybody here ever read the censored Jesus portions of the Talmud? Peter Schaefer wrote a great book called Jesus in the Talmud. If you want some really interesting reading for some time when you literally have nothing else to do, it's a great book. It happens that the story in Sota 47a is told about a student of Rabbi Yoshua ben Parachia, number 9. Yeah, we're going to get there. Is told about a student, Rabbi Yoshua ben Parachia, a student of Rabbi Yoshua ben Parachia. You know who the uncensored version of the Talmud says the student was? Jesus. Now it uses Yeshu. Could it be someone? It could be, but likely not. Number 9, the consequences of pushing someone away. It's unbelievable. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Le'olam tehei smol doche. Let your left hand, which is presumed you're weaker, which my son is a lefty, so I've learned otherwise, but your left hand push, v'yamin mekarevet, and your right hand, your stronger hand, should be pulling in. Lo ke'elisha shedachafo legechazi b'shtei yadav, not like Elisha the prophet, who pushed away his student Gehazi with 2 hands, which we're not going to talk about. V'lo ki Yoshua ben Parachia, and not like Yoshua ben Parachia, shedachvo lahanotzri, who pushed away the Nazarene, b'shtei yadav, with both hands. Let's find out what happened. Yoshua ben Parachia, what was the incident? When King Yanai was killing the sages, this is a Jewish king who was anti-sages, is a different conversation. Shimon ben Shetach was hidden by his sister, who happened to be Yanai's wife, Salome. While Rabbi Yoshua ben Parachia up and fled to Alexandria of Egypt. When peace was made between Yanai and the sages, Shimon ben Shetach sent to him to come back. When Yoshua ben Prachya arrived, he came to a certain inn. The innkeeper stood before him, honoring him considerably, and overall accorded him great honor. Rabbi Yoshua ben Prachya offered praise. How beautiful is this inn? And then one of his students, uncensored version, the Nazarene, said to him, Yeshu, the Nazarene, Rabbi, but the eyes of the innkeeper's wife are narrow. He replied, Wicked one, is that what you are engaged in? Gazing at women? He brought out 400 shofarot and excommunicated him with pomp and circumstance, because remember, he's out of exile now. This is his first act of being back as a rabbi. Every day, Jesus would come before him, but he would not accept his wish to return. One day, Rabbi Yoshua ben Prachya was reciting the Shema when his student came before him. He intended to accept him on this occasion, so he signaled to him with his hand to wait. You ever have that? Someone's praying, someone's in the middle, like this. You're going to have that a lot while you're here, right? The student thought he was rejecting him entirely. He thought he was pushing him off. He therefore went, stood up a brick, and worshipped it as an idol. This is Jesus' turn, according to the rabbis. Rabbi Yoshua ben Prachya said to him, Return from your sins. The student came to him and says, This is the tradition that I received from you. Anyone who sins and causes the masses to sin is not given the opportunity to repent. For Master said, Jesus performed sorcery and incited the masses and subverted the masses and caused the Jewish people to sin. And lastly, it is taught in a Braita that Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, get ready, regarding the evil inclination, a child, and a woman, the left hand should reject and the right hand should welcome. So I feel welcome, halfway. What's happening in this text? What's happening in this text is, I don't want you to think right now about what the stakes are of this argument in terms of the argument itself. I don't want you to think about this person if they're wicked or if they're not wicked. I don't want you to think about whether you have relationship or you don't have relationship. I don't even want you to think about your character. I want you to think about what happens when you consistently say to somebody, I'm not listening to you, get out of here. I want you to think about that. I actually want to think about that in terms of the 2016 election, because I think that's exactly what half of America did to the other half of America. And that is why everyone was surprised at the results of the election. Because half of America said, I'm not listening to your concerns, I'm not listening to your concerns. And the other half of America said, we have concerns, we have concerns. That's part of it. That's like it's an important piece of it. And that's why everybody started reading Hillbilly Elegy afterwards. Like, no, I'm listening to your concerns now. We do that all the time. I'm going to give you another example. This is going to be harder. I'm going to give you another example. We have a student at Hillel, and I've probably told this story before, who joined Jewish Voices for Peace. And Jewish Voices for Peace is not a recognized, group in Hillel. So he doesn't really come to Hillel anymore. And we asked him if he would come to our Seder. And he said, well, I don't, but we don't. And we said, yeah, we disagree on some pretty deep things. And yeah, there's also a power dynamic here, which is you're not allowed here, but please come to our Seder. Please come to our Seder. And that's not about he can be taught, he can't be taught. Because what I want to say, and I know that sounds incredibly condescending. But I don't mean it in that way. Do you know what probably happens in the story when Jesus goes in the rabbi's mind and worships a brick? Everybody says, see, I told you he was wicked. Right? The response is not, you shouldn't have pushed him away all the way. It's, I told you he was wicked, and this proves that he was wicked. Right? That's not the way that the rabbis in the Talmud are taking it. They're saying, wait, hold up. Are you sure? We're not saying open arms and everything is good. That's not what we said. What we said is, one hand pushes, that hand. One hand pushes, and one hand, how do you do that in reality? And let's talk about where you already have relationships. Because that's where you need to be able to do that. One hand pushes and one hand pulls. So thinking about the consequences of our decisions, right? And it's funny, I was on the committee for Wexner applications. And I was interviewing someone who's from If Not Now, who's an activist in If Not Now. And we were talking about, which we may have some in this room, and we were talking, and this is part of the intergenerational conversation. We were talking about the strategies of If Not Now, the polarization strategy, the protest strategy. And we were talking, and she said to me, we have a real argument within the organization. This was 3 years ago. I don't know if this is still the case. We have a real argument within the organization, which is, do we use a polarizing strategy? Or in the end, does that just cut off relationships with people and make it impossible to be in relationship? Or do we try to pursue some other strategy? And if we pursue that other strategy, is it even going to work? Is it even going to work? One more consideration. Back to your question, Arlene, about the third party. All of this presumes that I know I'm right and I know you're wrong, and all you need is a little love before you can see it. All you need is for me to say, my son, sit down with me in my robe. Let's talk about it. What if that's not the orientation? What if the orientation is, I got my position, you got your position, neither of us are moving. Neither of us are moving. I don't imagine through our conversation that we're going to move at all. Neither of us are moving. Well, we have an example of that too. We have a number of dialogues where someone who is not Jewish comes to a rabbi and asks a question that may seem outlandish and maybe even high stakes. And the rabbi answers in a way that's very creative and clever and flexible. And then the students say, okay, you got away with that answer to that guy. What's your answer to us? Watch what happens in number 10. And with this, we'll stop reading texts. Amar Rabbi Ilah. Rabbi Ilah said, Goy echad sha'alat Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. A non-Jew asked Rabbi Joshua, son of Korcha. Amar lo, he said, Katuv b'toratchem acharei rabim lahatot. Your Torah says you're supposed to follow the majority, doesn't it? Well, v'anu rabim mikem. We are the majority, and you are the minority. Mipnei ma atem mashvim imanu. Mipnei ma iatem mashvim imanu la'avodah zarah. Why don't you join us in idolatry, in paganism? We're the majority. We should follow the majority. So what's your answer? My answer is, what do you mean? Our Torah says we're not allowed to do. That's our answer. That's not the answer that he gives. Amarlo, he says, Yesh l'cha banim, you have kids? Amarlo, oh, he's kartani tzarati. You have reminded me of my great pain. Anybody ever say that to you? Anybody ever feel that? Yeah, you do. Don't lie. Amar lo lama. He says, why? Amar lo, he says, b'sha'ah she'hen yoshvin al shulchani. When they're sitting at my table, zeh mevarech le'olah ploni. This one prays to this God. V'zeh mevarech le'olah ploni. This one prays to that God. Ve'enan omdim ad shemifatzin mochein elu al elu. And they don't stop until they actually end up banging heads against each other and fighting over whose God is better. Amar le. So the rabbi says to him, mashvei atah imahem. Do you join them in that squabbling? Amar le lav. He says, no way. Amar lo. So he says to him, you know what? Ad she'ata omer li lahashvot imcha. You know what? As long as you're telling me that I should join you quarreling people over which God is better, I'm going to tell you, you go join your children. You're not willing to get into the squabbling bunch, and neither am I. Nidchaf v'halach lo. He was pushed off and he left. What is that answer? Two things about that answer. Number one, it's not an answer from the Torah. It's not an answer from my dogma. It's an answer that that other person can relate to. That's number one. What's your experience? What's your life experience? Number two, he's saying, you're not the majority. You're just a bunch of minorities. Your argument is wrong. Amrulo Talmidav, his student said to him, and let's go to the English. His student said to him, Rabbi, you have rebuffed this one with a reed, meaning with something flexible, with a flexible answer. To us, what will you reply? He said to them, I will not leave you empty-handed. Regarding Esav, 6 people, nefashot, are mentioned, and they are referred to as many people, as it is written. And Esav took his wives, sons, daughters, and all the people, nefashot, plural, of his household. Regarding Jacob, 70 people are mentioned. And they are referred to as one person, nefesh, singular, collective. As it is written, with 70 people, shivim nefesh, your ancestors went down to Egypt. Since Esav worshipped many gods, regarding him they are written as many people. Since Jacob did not worship many gods, regarding him they are written as one person. As it is written, all the people who, Nephesh, who were Jacob's offspring, were 70 people. What is this ridiculous answer? What is this ridiculous answer? The reason we don't worship idolatry is because literally that is the only completely black and white rule in the entire Torah. It is the only where you can never get around it. There's no way out. And even then, the Gemara talks about passively this and that and what do you do in the Middle Ages. But what's his answer? His answer to them is, we need to contend with that question. That is his answer. His answer is, I was not just giving that guy a line because I need to answer him. He said that guy is asking a good question, which is, why would your Torah tell you not to worship idolatry or paganism when the whole world goes that way? Why would this be your choice? And my answer to him is my answer to you, which is what our Torah sets us up for, is some sort of unity of purpose. And that don't think that how it looks on its face, that they're the majority and we're the minority, that that's the whole story. But I need to be able to answer that guy's question, not just for that guy, but for myself and for my camp. What does it mean to have an argument with somebody else where neither one of you is trying to change the other one's positions? Because you can't, because you won't. But that each one of you is actually willing to concede that the other side has valid questions, and to make sure in a John Stuart Mill kind of way that their questions sharpen the way that I'm thinking, that I don't just ignore because of who they are or because of what's at stake or because of our lack of relationship or because of the fact that I don't want a relationship. So what have we done here in sum? I think what we've done is we've made a lot of room in a way, and then we've also pushed ourselves. We've made a lot of room because the Gemara actually does talk about the places where engagement is going to be futile. Proverbs does actually talk about places where engagement is going to be futile. However, that's not the only mode. How do we keep in mind these three dimensions of the nature of the issue, of character, both theirs and ours, and of relationship, and ask ourselves, am I seeing everybody who is against me as nefarious, as opposed to being able to be exposed to a different position? Am I assuming that every conversation has to be to convince somebody else that they should adopt my opinion? Or should it be that when I engage, I actually want to think about the roots of my own opinion and whether they're just and whether they're right and how I may need to rethink certain things at certain points, as opposed to simply painting someone as a fool? And to the original question, when am I actually the chacham, or the chachama? When am I actually the wise person? And when am I really just chacham be'einav, only wise in my own eyes, which makes me no better than the fool? What we try to do here is not to be simplistic and say, be nice. What we try to do here is actually examine some of the issues that come up and try to look deeper into them. Well, that person, they don't care about the state of Israel or the Jew. Okay, slow. Right? Slow. That person doesn't have the right intentions. That person uses rhetoric, so I can't engage them. Or that person uses rhetoric, so the only way to engage that person is to use rhetoric back, because that's the only way they're going to understand. It's just through force. So how do we think about all of these different dimensions and understand that, number one, the puzzle is complex, and number two, that the assumptions that we make, both about people and consequences in those snap moments, are not always right and are not always productive. And that when you don't start with a relationship, sometimes you can create a relationship. And sometimes the goal is not to change someone's opinion, and sometimes the goal is to change someone's opinion. So I want to leave you with that, just to sit with it. Not to say, I'm this one, I'm that one, I'm this one, I'm that one, but to sit with the actual challenge and to imagine how, if I was the fool, I would want to be treated, how if I was the fool, I would want to be understood, and what it means to even use that terminology that we all so readily understand and accept and feel sympathy towards. What it even means to do that to begin with. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to take questions. Sir, bakasha. Could you just say your name? Because not everybody knows each other. And thanks, Eric. Wait. Can you say that again into the mic? Can you say that again? Is this recording? Can you say that into the video? Can you say that into the camera? You know what? Okay, sorry, Eric. You had real things to say.
The reason I said that is I interpreted your lecture as a confrontation between Michelle Obama, we go high when you go low, and Robert De Niro, fuck you. And you never once mentioned the whole Trump situation explicitly. But it seems to me that the dialogue you had is 100% relevant to the biggest conflict that American citizens, not just Jews, have in terms of how to deal with the unique situation we find ourselves in. And I want to suggest you suggested an alternative, actually, to either engaging or not engaging, and that is engaging at a level of abstraction or values or principles where it's not explicit, it's not absolutely explicit what that level of engagement is. And that's why I thought it was so important.
Thanks. I really appreciate that. Look, why am I not talking about Trump? Because I may have voted for somebody in here may have voted for somebody else. My family members voted for Donald Trump. I respect them. I love them. We have real disagreements about that. And I don't want to disrespect anybody in this room by making it about a particular person. I really don't. But of course it's relevant. Because what's happening now is everything feels so high stakes. Everything feels on both sides. And everybody's villainizing the other, vilifying. Everybody's vilifying the other. And because like we're not having as many relationships as we did, this whole siloing of different people not being in the same place, right? What do we try to do here? Pluralism. Do you know how hard it is to get people who actually disagree with each other in a room together? It is so hard. And it is so satisfying when we have real disagreement in this room and in all of our Hartman rooms. It is hard to manage. Nobody wants to be in the minority. Nobody wants to be. So I want to avoid that. But I totally agree with you that you can look to different people and see who's going high and who's going low. In the Republican camp and in the Democratic camp. And yeah, look for that. And think about what that actually means. 100%. But you're right, that Gemara at the end, that you're not always trying to solve somebody else's problems, but you're actually trying to engage the issue because you care about truth, you care about justice, you care about what's right, then that engagement can actually be incredibly, incredibly productive. Even as you each walk away and one of you goes back to paganism and one of you goes back to monotheism. It's a remarkable thing. Yes, you've been waiting for so long. What's your name?
Pete Betzler.
Pete?
Betzler.
Great.
I also thought it was a great talk.
Thank you.
And there's a lot of subtlety, which is one of your points, I think.
Yes.
I'm not pretending that this is the only answer by any means. But it seems to me that the first case was an ad hominem insult. And all the other cases involve some sort of intellectual...
Don't forget the matrona. Don't forget the Roman matron lady who said, you guys are so heavy, you could never have slept with your
I was
wives.
just going to mention that.
Beautiful.
I think that Jews and the Jewish tradition enjoys debate and taking things seriously, making intellectual arguments, and although that is very insulting, it's at least conceivable. It's wrong in many ways, to say such a thing, but it's at least conceivable, whereas walking up to someone and just saying your kids are really good is just ad hominem insult. Like, it is like saying something.
Well, I have a real question, which is, what if somebody comes up to you and says, I have this deed, I have this, proof that your children are illegitimate, and I wanted to tell you about Instead of saying, your kids are bastards, right? What if they did that? They're still wicked? Well, stakes are still pretty high, right? Stakes are pretty high. That's part of the conversation. You'd probably sit down with them. I probably wouldn't, right? To each their own. But that's exactly the challenge here of trying to figure out what's at stake in even having a conversation. I just don't want the boat to tip this way. I want to take somebody from this side. Yes, please. Wait, can you tell everybody who you are?
Hi, I'm Eleanor Gross. I understand that these.
Yeah, and I can repeat if you need.
I'll just talk about it.
She doesn't want to stand up. Leave her alone. Leave her alone.
We are at a time in the U.S. where this has become probably the most driving issue in most of our lives. We get up in the morning and read this paper, and you are presenting a way of balance, I think. What you said that it's truth. Truth is now something that is not, or goodness. Those things are being challenged now. Basic truths. This what we're confronting is not just Democrat versus Republican, but there has to be a basic.
Eleanor is saying there has to be a basic truth. What I started with is that I'm not talking about, what is it, epistemological humility, that I know what I don't know. It's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying where I know. I know I'm right, and I know you're wrong. What's my plan, right? And I want to actually push back. I don't think that basic truths of what's good are being questioned only now. I think that's always been the case. Slavery was good at a point. Extermination of Jews was good in a place. There's always an argument over what's good. There's always an argument over what's good, which is why we actually need to hold very deeply to our convictions. And the idea of that final Gemara of the majority thinks this, and yet I'm sticking with that, that's the kind of conviction we need. But that doesn't mean that I should be writing on someone's Facebook wall, give me a break. And it doesn't mean that I should be saying F you at this, that, and the other. It's not what it means. So I'm glad you asked that question. This is not about not having conviction. We must have conviction on all sides. The stakes are incredibly high. It's not that those two rabbis didn't have conviction. It's that those two rabbis actually had such conviction that they felt it was important to engage. That mattered. That's where I want us to be. That's where I want us to be. And not always, and not with everybody, because it doesn't always work. Jack. Jack, who are you? Jack? Jack. I just said his name.
Chicago, I'm staying off of politics.
You don't have to. You don't have to at all.
That'll come another time.
Okay.
Do you believe that since there was a 60-year difference between Shammai and Hillel, that there was a generational thing that goes on in our community often? Shammai being much more traditional and Hillel being much more liberal.
Okay, so here's what I would say. There's a source here that I didn't read, which is, I don't think it's a great read of Mishle, of Proverbs, that suggests that the don't answer a fool is when you're young, because when you're young, you think everybody who's against you is just a fool. And do answer a fool when you're older, when you become a little more sophisticated and realize, like, sometimes people just don't know what you have to say. And it doesn't mean they're going to change their minds, but, like, they're not evil. They're not stupid. They're not, right? Which I think is it's an interesting thing. I mean, I'm 37, so I'm, like, moving from that exuberance of, I don't know, I'm kind of in a cynical stage, so maybe I'm somewhere in between those two, I don't know. But I don't like painting pictures of the two of them as that, like Hillel and Shammai, but I do think that what you're pointing out is it can actually go the opposite way, which is people who are young, who are forming their ideas, are willing to engage with anyone, with everyone. And people who are older and more established, they know. Could be. Or they could be more traditional to begin with, and everything seems newfangled. So the reason I didn't actually read that is because I think it could go either way. And that's going to be really important for Shabbat, our conversation about intergenerational Derech Eretz, of how does each side automatically see the other. Oh, you've been doing the same thing for so long, you don't know. You'll never change, and or you're young and naive, you don't know nothing, right? Meaning, who's the fool here? So it's not just the people who actually disagree with us or people who have rhetoric, but it's actually pieces of our community. You're the fool, and I'm the wise person in my eyes. No, you're the fool, and I'm the wise person in my eyes. And I think that's something to contend with, right? I think we have time for a couple more. Yes, what's your name?
Hannah Stein Hain from New York.
Hannah, hi.
I noticed that it varied in the Gemara's that you read whether we actually saw the reaction of the person who was the object of the rabbinic attitude.
Yes.
I think that anticipating the person's reaction is a really important part of how you respond.
Yes.
So I'm curious if there are indications about the
Great.
impact it actually had on the people.
Great question. So Hannah's asking, in most of these Gemaras, you don't find how the fool reacted after they, one exploded, we saw that. But this is why I brought in the Gemara about Rabbi Yoshua ben Prachia's student. Because that Gemara, this is why I brought in the Gemara about Rabbi Yoshua ben Prachia's student, because it's trying to tell you, wait a second, there's another piece of this puzzle, which is, where is somebody going to go if I push them away? And so I think there we're dealing with it. Another place that actually deals with it rather beautifully, and there are many places that deal with this, and I just wanted to give that as one example, also because I think it's shocking and censorship and it's interesting, is the Oven of Achnai story. Anybody who reads the continuation of the Oven of Achnai story, the Oven of Achnai story in Bava Metzia in the Babylonian Talmud is in a section that the Mishnah says you can't hurt someone with words. You should not be doing onat dvarim. And the end of the story is that Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkinus, who's the one who says, if I'm right, the tree is going to uproot itself. If I'm right, this and that. And then they say, no, it's not in heaven. Get out of here, right? They put him in excommunication, and actually they're punished for it. The rabbis are actually punished for it. And there are rabbis who die over this, die over the tears of Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkinus. And the Gemara actually ends by saying, the gates of heaven are always open to onat dvarim. The gates of heaven are always open to those who are afflicted by the speech of others. And God will always listen. So there are plenty of situations, but I wanted to give you one just as an exemplary, right? Remember, the steps that we were trying to do here are to basically say, it looks neat based on our three variables, but actually it's messy because sometimes you actually do need to engage when the stakes are high, and sometimes a rasha is not a rasha, but actually they're underexposed. Not always, but sometimes. And then to bring in two other considerations that don't come up in the Gemaras that are about those verses in Proverbs. One being, what's going to happen to the person depending on how you do this? And two, what if it's not about changing somebody else's mind, but it's actually about sharpening your own and learning and talking in some sort of bigger values kind of context. So I'm really happy that you brought that up. I think we have 4 minutes, so I want to take one more question. Yes?
Hi, Mary Jane.
Hi, Mary Jane. It's great to see you.
Like there is an incredibly important sentence here, and it's well answered to the guy who wants to make 400 Jews up. He says, my son, for what reason do you say this? So I remember there was a sweet, very good-hearted, holy man in my synagogue, but we disagreed on every possible political view. It turned out that his formative years were during World War II, and my formative years were during protests, the war in Vietnam, and this explained everything. So it's my background, life experiences like this to explain much of the Arab-Israeli disagreements, much of the red state, blue state disagreements. As I said, you have to find out what the background is.
Well, so what's interesting about Mary Jane, what you're saying, is it actually goes back to Eleanor's point, which is, how do you appreciate that people are coming from different places and yet be perfectly comfortable in the place where you are, right? How do you do that? And that is actually why I think our rhetoric is so ugly. Because what happens is, let's go back to that word salience, right? That word salience, prominence, which my colleague Michal Biton taught me actually this year in terms of like a social science category. That how important the issue is, how much it's actually part of your identity, your narrative of who you are and who you think you are and who you want to be and what kind of impact it has. That is what makes us so flailing about it. Because it is scary as hell. Because it is who we are. And someone's trying to undermine exactly who we are and what we stand for and what we thought was good and what we know is good. And what I'm wondering is, how do I actually understand that people have different exposures and still think that what I think is right and good, and by the way, even be able to think what they think is wrong, and maybe even damaging. That's the root of being able to have conflict without having to live in, instead of the Civil War, just sort of splitting. That's the root. That's what it is. We have 2 more minutes. Anybody got a short one? Ray.
So I'm thinking about the principal position that Deborah Lipstadt took about arguing with David Irving with regards to the Holocaust.
Great
And
example.
she never wanted to engage because sometimes you can't engage. If you engage, you acknowledge that there's an alternative position.
Back to Don.
So my question is, what can we learn about that principal position for other arguments where the stakes are so high, and it's not just me engaging with you, but my arguments in terms of Deborah Lipstadt, I have the memory of people that have perished in the Holocaust and survivors at stake as well. So what principles can we take from that position about when not to engage currently?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. I have to say that engaging with someone who is questioning literally your existence in a way, it's gonna turn your stomach. And if it doesn't turn your stomach, then you're not who you say you are. But just because it turns your stomach, like those 2 rabbis, doesn't mean you don't have to provide an answer. If the consequences, when you don't provide an answer, are going to be grave. What Deborah Lipstadt encounters in someone denying the Holocaust is she's stuck in a catch-22. If I don't answer, people didn't die in the Holocaust. And if I answer and I lose, people didn't die in the Holocaust. That's the danger that we're in. But she chose to take that leap because she realized that I know that if I do nothing, people will not have died in the Holocaust for these people. But if I do something, there's a chance that I can represent those people who died. And that's the chance she took. What would I be saying if she lost? I'd probably be saying exactly the opposite. Let's be honest. So I think it's a dilemma. But I think the story of the obese rabbis, it's exactly what that story is trying to get at. In all of its ridiculousness and funniness, and what it's trying to get at is this idea that when things are at stake, you don't run away, because they're not going to be any less at stake if you run away. That is the mirage. They're not going to be any less at stake just because I don't see them. I think that's what guides me in trying to understand this. That's what I would say. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day, and Shabbat Shalom.